The illustrious Jabba bids you welcome.
I'm going to regret this.
I'm Pete Mitchell. He's Peyton Jones. And this is the Church Planter Podcast, brought to you by Church Planter Magazine. Hey, Church Planter, this is Pete Mitchell.
And this is Peyton Jones.
And you, my friend, are listening to the Church Planter Podcast.
Lucky you.
That should be the new tagline. Lucky you.
Welcome. You're lucky to be here. How fortunate are you?
You know, it was so funny. Okay, so I still do a thing called the Detailer Inner Circle for auto detailers. I do that with Jimbo Balaam, who's a ex-church planter of ours. And so we do I guess a coaching call is what you would call it with all of our detailers. And we were doing that yesterday, and we were talking about, all of a sudden we got on the subject of Alex Jones and how,
oh man,
both Jimbo and I never were into Alex Jones. And then we were told, hey, you got to watch this podcast that Joe Rogan did with Alex Jones. And it was like 4 hours or 5 hours.
Oh, wow. I want to see it.
Neither one of us
amazing.
Could quit watching. It was like I was glued to this thing because it was just crazy.
So tell me, because Joe Rogan's, he's a smart dude.
He really is.
He's thoughtful. He's smart. He doesn't take the party line easily. He'll push back with his guests. I mean, he's refreshingly honest, and he's intelligent. So I can only imagine, actually, I can't imagine what a conversation with those two would be like.
Well, the thing is, they know each other. They're good friends.
What?
I know. So it was
some of that has to be an act with Alex Jones, though. Because let's be honest,
it's
news-flavored entertainment is what we see nowadays. It's not news anymore. It's news-flavored entertainment.
Without a doubt. And if you watch that podcast, and guys, there's probably vulgar language on it. I honestly can't remember. It's been several months since I watched it. So just fair warning, I think they light up a joint. I can't remember. I know he did that with Elon Musk, but I wouldn't be surprised if he did that, if Joe Rogan did that with everybody. I don't know. I don't really watch or listen to that podcast. But you can see, Alex Jones has said some crazy stuff, and you can see, I think he truly believes some of the stuff that he says. And what's funny is, as a Christian, I look at some of the stuff he says and I'm like, I don't think he realizes that's a demonic thing that he's talking about there. He doesn't realize that.
Joe Rogan's a Christian?
No. No, I'm not saying either one of them are. I'm saying me as a Christian, I'm listening to this going, I don't think Alex Jones realizes he's opening the door to some demonic stuff. Real life demons, he's opening the door to them.
Really?
Yeah. Because it's just
now
weird
from
stuff that
from
happens.
Pete Mitchell. That's crazy talk.
Well,
but I love it.
Yeah, I think if you watched it, you would know exactly what I was talking about. You'd be like, "Oh yeah, that's some demonic stuff going on there."
I read about a pastor yesterday in Outreach magazine, and this is maybe 5 years old, and I think it was Outreach. Right now, I'm prepping for my textbook, and I came across this crazy story where
By the way, they ever sign their contract?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I got it. Yes, I got a check too.
Woo-hoo!
So, anyways, what happened was he. This guy, he just said, my first week as a pastor was an exorcism and suicide. And what happened was he went into this house, did this exorcism, led these people to Jesus, because he said there was supernatural stuff popping off when I got there. And this guy seemed really sane. It's not his gig. It's not his shtick. He's known for writing to pastors about their own soul care. And I kept the article because I thought, well, this I'm going to tuck this away, maybe interview this guy one day. But he said that was his first week. Not all of his weeks, by any means were like that. But what his point of his article was that he was a wreck afterwards because, first off, these people, he said they received Jesus. The person I brought, I thought they were more experienced in it. They weren't. They were a novice too. And but the couple received Jesus, and they drove 500 miles in the car, got a cheap, seedy motel. The next morning, because they were so scared, next morning got up and drove into a piling. Oh. And them and their kids died. He said that the officers said it was suicide. So he said, he said it was suicide in his article. But I was a little confused because the emotional state and the agitation this couple probably had, and, perhaps sleep deprivation after driving 500 miles, unless there's mental illness, I don't know. But when he wrote about that, he just said at the end of it, nobody, it was kind of like being a soldier. Like, no one checks, are you okay? Because he had to then do the funeral, and, it's just crazy. Got called in this police situation. He goes, so for the rest of he goes, I recovered eventually, but I had to do it alone. And so that became a passion of his. But it was it was amazing to me to read, because I remember looking at it could have been Christianity Today. I don't remember what it was, but I remember looking at the cover going, I don't see stories like that in this magazine very often. It was kind of cool.
That's interesting. It's really, wow. Huh.
It just reminds you of the world that we live in, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So Alex Jones and Joe Rogan. So you guys are you can't look away, huh?
Well, I guess Jimbo he goes, yeah, I started going down the Alex Jones rabbit hole and listening to more of his stuff. He goes, and then I couldn't hang with anymore. Like, it got too weird. So I don't know. I didn't go down that rabbit hole to that degree. I just was like, okay, yeah, this is. It was entirely fascinating though, really, really fascinating, and for that reason, I say it was worth a watch. Like, I watched it instead of listening to it. So
awesome. Well, hey, I'll check it out for sure. I mean, 4 hours of Alex Jones. I mean, might need an Advil afterwards, but
it's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah, I'll see little crazy clips of him sometimes, or someone will make a meme, and I'm thinking that's put on. Like they'll show him staggering or grabbing his heart, and I'm like, okay, that's performance. Like, yeah. I just can't take him serious. I think he's a showman, is what he is. And so much of this
he figured out a way to make money off of that.
Paranoia.
No doubt. No doubt in my mind. And I think over the years,
fear-based marketing, I've never heard of such a thing.
Yeah, I know, right? I think over the years, though, it's captured his attention and focus as well.
Right.
And now I don't think he can break free from it. Like, I think, is going to believe that stuff. But
they do make the point often that that's one of Trump's favorite shows. And I don't know if any of that stuff's true, but that's how they want to portray him. You never know. I mean, when they would say, "Oh, Obama this and that," you never knew.
Yeah.
It just, the media, again, it's news flavored entertainment.
Yeah.
I watched a clip on the Bill Maher. How do you say that guy's name?
Bill Maher
show. And it was interesting to me because, just watching people get so emotionally worked up. I mean, they had this Republican on there and two Democrats, and there were three Democrats, and they could not let her get through a statement without going into this rant. And she's like, "Hey, can I finish?" And they're dropping F-bombs, and they're practically crying, and they're shouting, and it's like, wow. I read a great meme this week that said, people told us not to talk about religion and politics, and they did us a disservice. What they should have taught us was how to talk about religion and politics civilly.
Yeah. Yeah. True story.
Yeah.
Story.
Yeah. True dat.
So, hey, I got something that I found out yesterday.
Ooh.
Wanted to call you immediately and tell you,
Ooh.
and then decided it's the day before we record the podcast. I'll just wait
Suck it up, Mitchell.
and
Suck
tell
it
him on
up.
the podcast.
Okay.
So this was this is a big deal for me. A really, really, really big deal.
Okay.
You're not
I'm
the first to
listening.
know. I told Dan Sams because I had to record a podcast with him
Okay.
yesterday.
I know
so he
you
got to
you
find out.
love him more than me now.
I do. You know, right now, me and Dan are the new Pete and Dan. I mean, Peyton. Peyton. I just said Pete and Dan. The new Peyton
Pete and Dan.
Pete.
We're the new Pete and Dan. There's your tagline.
I know, right? So, okay, here's the deal, guys. If you listened to us a while back, a few weeks ago, we talked about health, and we talked about my health journey, right? And so, you know, I've had a major shift in how I eat, exercise, all that type of stuff. And I mean, you know, I'm seeing the consequences of that in the sense that, you know, I've dropped somewhere between 60 and almost 65 pounds.
That's amazing, dude. Well done.
Thank you. And I mean, I still have a ways to go. Like I still have another 50 or so that.
But that's
that
a
I'm-
huge, like, you're going to get there, dude. That's so much. That's
well,
amazing.
it hasn't been difficult. I mean, that was part of what I shared on that podcast is once I learned basically everything I'd been doing and everything I'd been taught was not true, that all I really needed to do, I mean, and this was the kind of the core of it, guys, I just needed to change what I was eating. It wasn't even, I mean, that was the big change. It was literally, okay, don't eat these foods, eat these foods. And everything changed for me. Taste changed for me. Hunger pains changed for me. Everything changed. So, and like I shared on that podcast, diabetes runs in my family. And I've always been told, you know, basically I'm going to get it. I mean, that was kind of like, you know, you're going to get it. And as I shared on that podcast, you remember, Peyton, I've got a highly addictive personality. I like, when I jump into something, I devour it. When I got into financial planning, I literally devoured every cassette tape on financial planning I could get because that's what we had back then. It was pre-CD days. Went to every seminar I could go to. Like, I devoured everything so I could become the best financial planner in the shortest amount of time. When I got into marketing, it was the exact same thing. I consumed everything I could get my hands on. So I could become the best in the shortest amount of time. When I got into guns, same thing. I just consumed everything I could as quickly as I could. And same thing in the health thing. So I've been watching documentary after documentary, reading book after book after book, learning everything that I could. And I think one of the things, and I shared this on that podcast, one of the things that kind of blew me away was that diabetes is reversible. And that's just not what you're taught. Like, what you're taught is there's no cure for it. And that is true, that there is no drug cure for diabetes, but there is a natural cure. And it's basically a lifestyle change. And depending on how far you are in that diabetic process, it's going to take you, you know, either a short time or a long time to reverse that condition that you've got. And so, like, I was even watching a documentary over the last week. I don't remember when I watched it exactly over the last week. But, I mean, they had this one gal for 20 years, you know, insulin. She'd been on it, and it just kept increasing and increasing and increasing. And she made these changes, the same changes that I've made. And her numbers have plummeted. And she's off all insulin and almost off of what's that one? Do you know what I'm talking about? Metaflorin, or I don't remember what it is, but it's one of the oral medications that diabetic patients are often on. And of course, you know, when you're a diabetic, you got to do this stuff under a doctor's care who understands what you're doing, because your insulin and the medications you're taking are directly tied to what you're eating. So when you start changing that stuff, your doctor is going to have to adjust things. Because, you know, you can run into serious problems, guys. So don't go, hey, Pete said this on the podcast, right? And go do this stuff, because that would be bad. So So one of the things that I didn't share on the podcast, that I think I shared with you, about a year and a half ago, actually, no, I guess it's about 2.5 years ago. I was going through issues, blurriness in my eyes, and I could tell, if I had like a lot of sugar one day, I'd had ice cream, maybe a beer earlier in the day. The next day, my eyes would just be shot. And so I'm like, okay, I must have diabetes. It runs in my family. I'm overweight. I must have it. I got to go to the doctor and get tested. So I make an appointment, going to the doctor. They do the blood test. I get the results back from the blood test. They're like, you're not diabetic, but you are pre-diabetic. So basically how they do that is they do an A1C test, and your A1C level, your hemoglobin A1C, it's a test to see, essentially it tells them how much sugar you've had in your blood over the last basically 3 to 4 months. Because
that's cool.
Blood cells.
It's amazing they can do that.
Well, that's what they've discovered. That's what that test is actually producing. Because blood cells, typically, the life cycle is anywhere from 100 to 120 days. Oh. So when they look at that number, they're like, okay, then this is your average. Most of the time they go, it's basically your 3-month average, and that is what I've since discovered, because of all the reading I've done. That's not the whole picture. That's just the easiest ones that doctors use. And so sometimes you could have a false positive for being a diabetic because your A1C could be high for a different reason. Right. And so there's really 3 tests that they should be looking at, but no doctor ever does, because they just, oh, you're diabetic, boom, here's the medication, right. And you're on that the rest of your life.
Yeah, insulin or
whatever this
type 2,
meta whatever, I can't even pronounce it. So anyway, that's kind of like the wake up call, if you will. So if you're I believe it's 5.6 or lower, that's the normal range. If you're 5.7 to, I want to say it's 6.3, you're pre-diabetic. And then if you're 6.4 or higher, you're considered diabetic. So I was at 6. So I was literally right in the middle between normal and diabetic. And so obviously I knew I needed to make changes in my life. Didn't really start getting serious about it, like we talked about on that last podcast, until this year, and just was like, started seeing results from exercising and eating less, not eating right. I didn't know how to eat right when I started. And so basically June 1st, as I mentioned on that last podcast, I saw a documentary that like changed my whole perspective on sugar, and not just like the blatant sugar, cake, cheesecake, ice cream. I'm talking about sugar, excuse me, in bread, sugar in essentially all this stuff that we're eating. And I read this one guy's book, I think it's called the 10-Day Detox Diet or Sugar Detox, something like that. He's the guy who did the Daniel Plan with Rick Warren. And so I was like, hey, you know what? I could do this. I can go on this for the next 10 days. And I immediately started noticing changes, like immediately noticed changes in my body. Like one of the first things, all those aches and pains you get when you're like getting up out of the chair at night, about ready to go to bed, or waking up in the morning, they were like almost immediately gone. So while I know losing weight helps that, this was not because of losing weight. This was because all of a sudden I changed what I was eating, what I was putting into the machine, if you will. Right. And so finally, here's the point of the story. This is like I take the longest time to
You
get to
did
the point
take
of
a
my
long
story.
time with this. I gotta say,
we're
we're getting old, dude. That's what old people do now. They go, yeah, my bunions, they've been hurting quite a bit, and I went to the doctor, and full reports, man, on medical stuff. That's the age.
I know it is, but here I want everyone to understand what a big deal this is. So last week, I bought a do-it-yourself blood test kit that you send off to a lab, and they basically, the one that I got was like the heart health kit, so they check all your cholesterol levels and your A1C, which is what I was at 6.0, pre-diabetic. And so I was curious. I'm like, okay, 3 months of basically cutting out all non-natural sugars. Where am I at? I'm curious. I'd like to know where I'm at. Because I know I'm not at my goal. I know I'm not at the end goal. So I got those back, guys. And here's the exciting thing that I got to share with you. First of all, let me share with you some of the bad news that came back in my test. Here's we should call this Pete's Health Moment. Pete's Health Moment with the Church Planner Podcast. So my HDL, which is what's called your good cholesterol level, I'm low on that. So that's not a good thing. I should be higher on that. And then looking at some of the reasons that causes it to be low, the only one that I fit is I'm still overweight. So I'm like, okay, that's probably my reason. We'll find out in another 3 months because I'll do the test again in another 3 months. However, that being said, my bad cholesterol level is extremely low. So they look at the ratio, and I'm fine on the ratio. I'm well within the normal range. My total cholesterol, which is where they take your good and your bad cholesterol, I am like so good on that range, it's ridiculous. So it could be too that my good cholesterol is low because my body doesn't need much of it. I mean, the good cholesterol actually takes out the bad cholesterol, and I don't have a lot of bad cholesterol, which is kind of funny because they say, you get that from eating meat. And even on my new diet, I eat meat. I eat meat like it's going out of style. But I don't eat sugar, right? I mean, I've taken out basically sugar and anything that the body processes so quick, it might as well be sugar, like pasta and baked potatoes and all that stuff. So, I mean, that's really like majorly good news. But here was the one thing, my triglycerides, all that stuff, great numbers, great on all that. Here was the biggie for me though. My HbA1c. So this is the one that I was 6.0. Remember, 5.7 is the start of pre-diabetic. 6.4 is diabetic. I came in at 5. I am so far under the pre-diabetic. I'm not pre-diabetic anymore. Like, I'm not pre-diabetic. I'm totally in the normal range. 3 months is what that took. 3 months of eating right. How crazy is that?
Dude, that's amazing. Just 3 months.
3 months of eating right.
Dude.
Dropped my A1C a whole point.
Huh. Wow,
and
dude.
I'm totally within what they call the optimal range.
Wow. That's amazing, dude.
It's amazing. And I mean, I'll be honest, I was freaked out. I was like, it's been 2.5 years.
Run that test again. I know, right?
I'm going to do it again in 3 months, but
yeah.
Because by then my goal
You'd be
is
like Jack LaLanne.
I know, right? My goal is to be closer to my target weight.
So when you get to your target weight, you have to promise me something. You have to get a Jack LaLanne onesie, light blue polyester, and you have to hop into that thing and take a picture, take a selfie.
Well, I was kind of thinking more of a Richard Simmons outfit.
Yeah. Come on. Deal a meal.
I'm just saying.
Remember that Deal a meal?
I do.
He was funny. If you guys never saw Richard Simmons, man, it was so funny growing up in the 80s. Because, we had all of these people, and back then, the let me see if I can, LGBT, Q, blah, 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 all the rest. It wasn't like a thing back then. It was kind of like whispered about. So when these public figures were just clearly flamboyantly gay, nobody really knew. Like, you thought, he might just be eccentric. Jack,
today
it's
you would
true,
look at
isn't
him and
it?
go, "Oh, this is obvious." But back then, you were always.
But back then, you didn't know. It was like Prince, Boy George, Michael Jackson. You had people that were effeminate, and you just never knew, because at the same time, you had guys like Rock Hudson, who were extremely masculine and yet wholly gay, and it was like it wasn't a well-known secret.
I didn't know that about him.
Oh, you didn't know that? Yeah, he died of AIDS.
I wasn't a Rock Hudson fan, so
funny enough, my dad worked in Hollywood, and Rock Hudson grabbed his butt. I am not making this up. My dad, like, when Rock Hudson died, he smiled. We were out, and he smiled and said, "I knew that." And I said, "Really? How?" And he goes, I was in the food line. My dad did some extra work, and they did work with Rock Hudson, Charlton Heston and stuff. And he said he was in the food line and he felt this hand on his butt and he stiffened like, and he looked around. He said, there's Rock Hudson just smiling at him. My dad said, I just moved down the food line, like I feel, it was not my dad's thing.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But
I
he,
get that.
hey, Rock Hudson, I mean, if a guy is going to pick up on you, you could do worse.
Hey, that's the one to get, right?
Chuck Norris, Rock Hudson, I'm not starting rumors about Chuck Norris. He will find me and hunt me down and kill me.
Dude, that's going to be like one of the saddest days when he dies, because that dude is old at this point. Like old.
Oh my gosh, dude. Dude, it was so funny. I saw the best meme the other day where it
him
showed
going on
all
vacation
these,
in
Florida.
Florida.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It shows all this traffic trying to get out, and there's a single car driving in, and it says Chuck Norris decides to make a trip, go on vacation in Florida.
Yeah. No, that was great.
How do we see all the same memes? We must be super
because I
connected
think
on
I
Facebook.
share them, and then you see the ones that
I see all
share.
your stuff. That's what it is. It's funny. Most things I see that are funny, if I look, I'm like, oh, Pete shared that. No point in me sharing that.
Oh, really? That's funny.
It's true. It's true. I figure if you share it, well, it's kind of like
every once in a while. Like I found one yesterday that was definitely one I could not share publicly. But when you get a good one like that, and you're like, I have this one friend I can send this to, and like it was something that I knew Dan Sams was going through in his life, and I was like, okay, no way can I share this one publicly, but this will speak directly to Dan and give him comfort. I sent it to him, and he's just dying laughing because it was a perfect meme. But sometimes there are perfect memes that you can't share publicly, and that was one of them.
Right.
But hey, no, one thing I do want to share with you guys. So a lot of my health advice has come from my buddy Wayne. My buddy Wayne, who's been in jail the last couple of years, he's a bodybuilder, certified sports nutritionist, and actually he got out this week. I haven't had a chance to talk to him yet because they don't actually let you talk on the phone and right away.
That's interesting.
Yeah, he'll probably start working for me next week. And so one of the things that I did during all of this is I kept going to Wayne going, hey, man, what about this? What about that? And he was advising me because he's been working with a lot of the inmates in prison, getting them healthy. And then the guards started coming to him because he was getting all of the inmates healthy. And they're like, these guys have sedimentary lifestyles. They don't do anything. And they're now fit. Can you help me? And he's like, yeah, I can help you. He's like, but I need a testimonial from you because when I get out, I need, testimonials. So anyway, here's the deal, guys. I'm thinking about doing a health summit for pastors in January, and I want to have some guys who have basically had massive changes, guys and gals who've had massive changes like me. If you're like, hey, I'd like to have some professional mentoring, not going to cost you anything. You just got to be serious about it. I want you to reach out to me. I'm going to hook you up with Wayne so that way he can help dial you in what's going to be the appropriate thing for you. If you got a problem with the fact that he was in jail, just know now that he was in jail, so then don't reach out because he's the expert. Literally, he's the guy I go to, and he knows what he's doing. I would actually venture to say that he's studied this stuff more than probably anyone else I've ever met. So that's why his advice has been so good and helped me lose, basically 65 pounds, almost 65 pounds, just shy of 65 pounds. So if you're interested, I'm going to put this in the show notes, but I want you to text me the word health to 562-553-5008. And I'm going to put that in the show notes. You just text the word health, 562-553-5008. We'll talk to you, see if it's right for you. I'm just looking for a few guys because I want to have some examples to show. Here's what can happen when you start doing things healthy. I don't want to be the only one who does this. And again, I'm not going to be the one leading it. I'm going to have Wayne do it. He doesn't know this yet. He's going to find out when he comes to work for me next week. By the way, you're working with these guys for free because they need help. So if you're interested, guys and gals, reach out to me, do that, and we'll hook you up. Sound like a plan, my man?
Sounds really good. Sounds really good. I mean, I won't be doing any of it because,
You're already pretty.
it's funny. I have been losing weight. I'm running again, and I'm eating right. I have a certain regimen I follow,
That's awesome.
When I stick to it, it does me well. But I got to be careful I don't drink beer so much. So like beer is my max for beer would be like 2-3 times a week. But that's very fattening, and I'll have like one. It's not like a ton or anything like that. But it definitely it's one of those things where I'm going off it anyways. Just kind of. I think you go through stages. I came off of working for NAM and beer was great, but that's the most calories you can pack on. I mean, beer is probably the worst thing you could do.
Yeah, it is. And that's why I don't drink it anymore. I mean, one day I'm sure I will have a beer again, but it's like at this point in my life, no, like I'm not. I'm seeing too much results that it's like I don't want to screw all that up just because I want to have a beer. Like I don't like beer that much where I have to have a beer. So I've been without the nectar of the land for a while.
That's good. Well, your body's going to show it. Jacqueline, One Piece. What do you call those? It's not a one piece. It's
It's a onesie.
Yeah, but it's not a onesie. It's got a name. I think it starts with an H. I can't remember what they're. Or a romper. A romper. That's what they are.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking because that's what he used to wear. Jacqueline wear a romper.
That's
He'd have like
funny.
shorts and short sleeves. It was like poly, and it had that like kind of suit collar. It was pretty cool.
That's
He
funny.
could pull it off, and he was super fit. What was creepy growing up was Slim Goodbody. You remember that guy?
No, not at all.
Dude, we're so far over in Smack Talk.
I know.
Hey, speaking of Slim Goodbody, anyways, he was a weird dude. He was white. He had an afro, and he wore a suit that looked like the inside of a human body.
Oh,
And he would jump
nice.
around, and it was weird. It was weird. It was like a giant leotard made to look like your insides.
Oh my gosh, dude! Quit calling me, whoever you are. All right, so let's get into the topic. Let me cue up Doc Brown here.
Great Scott! It's time for this week's topic.
Let's get down to the nitty-gritty.
Woo! All right, I just felt like doing that. What's our topic?
Our topic actually is going to be something that we've touched on in the past, and that is prayer.
And I just can't get enough. And I just can't get enough.
Ain't that the truth? So
Yeah.
here's the reason why we're talking about this, and I'm going to share it because I'm the one who brought it up with Peyton. I said, hey, I think this is a topic I want us to cover. So at my church, we're doing this thing right now where we've got these devotionals that the church has put out, and so each day, you got a little passage to go through, and actually, it wasn't today's passage. It's the passage that I'm on today. How about that one? I'm about a week behind the rest of the church. And the passage that they're covering is Mark 1:35 through 45. And in this passage, it says, basically Jesus gets up while it's still dark. He goes out to a desolate place and he prays. When everyone else gets up, they can't find him. They take all this time looking around for him. They finally find him. They're like, hey, we couldn't find you. And his response is, all right, well, let's go get to work. Let's start preaching. And they would go preach in the synagogues and cast out demons. And so one of the questions that it asked, and then, Jesus heals the leopard. And this is where Jesus says, hey, don't tell anyone. And of course, as soon as the leopard goes, he starts telling everyone. So it was that passage, guys. And so one of the questions in this daily devotional was, what do you observe about Jesus' prayer life here? And so I just kind of really started thinking about that question, and I was somehow the thought of looking at prayer as they did it in the New Testament versus how we do things today. And that's what kind of caught my attention. So the first thought, and this is what I shared with Peyton, my first thought was, okay, first of all, prayer readied Jesus to go take action. to go preach, and it says, they preached in the synagogues and to cast out demons. So it was like, they suited up to preach the gospel, and at the same time they had to play in the big game, right? They're casting out demons. Obviously it's Jesus, so he can cast out demons really easily. The rest of us, we got to do a little bit more prayer and fasting, but that's not the point here. I just thought it was okay. He suits up with prayer. And then the thought struck me, okay, look at how is this different from us today? Like, what do we do today? Like, what's the big deal when we go to Sunday school or church or, I take my son to Wednesday night kids youth group. Like, the big deal is everyone brings their Bible and we carry our Bibles everywhere we go. Not that that's a bad thing, but I'm like, they didn't do that back then because they didn't have them, right? They didn't have, everyone had a copy, right? I mean, it wasn't like it is today. So what did they focus on more? And I'm not trying to, say I think, we focus too much on reading God's word. That's not it at all. But I do wonder, okay, do we focus enough on prayer? Because that's what Jesus focused on, was on prayer. And obviously he knew the Bible. Obviously he studied the Bible. He was teaching in the synagogues at 12, right? I mean, he knew the Bible. I get that. And I'm not trying to say that the Bible is bad, but I just do wonder, like in my own life, what is the bigger focus? Is the bigger focus prayer with God, or is the bigger focus reading the Bible? And not that reading the Bible is bad, but I can honestly say for myself, I don't think I have enough focus on prayer. So that's kind of the topic, and I'm going to lay it out there before you, Pastor Jones, to rebut me and to come back at me. And coach me in the ways that I should be.
So, yeah, it's good. I think we have to be careful saying one is more important than the other. Right. And I'm not saying you're saying that, but I think you could easily infer.
I think it could easily be taken that way. That's why I'm trying to be so careful about it.
Right. And I hear you being careful. Here's the thing, right? The teaching was something, even in Acts, like from day one of the church's existence as what we know it as today. It says that they devoted themselves daily to the apostles' teaching. So those apostles, most of them, were going to go on to write scripture. Of course, Luke comes in, and a few others, like the writer of Hebrews, which may have been Barnabas. There's no author attributed to that book. Scholars have assumed it was Paul. Some think it was Barnabas. Some think it was someone unnamed. So the apostles don't have to be.
My vote is it was absolutely not Paul.
Yeah, so
it does not fit his writing style at all.
Right, correct. And in fairness, people would say things like about different scriptures, like, "Oh, the pastoral epistles aren't Paul because it doesn't fit his writing style." However, one of the things that we always have to keep in mind is that Paul didn't write his own letters; he dictated them, and others wrote them for him. So sometimes you're going to get Paul's writing style across, and there is very much of Paul. Like huge amounts of Paul in the pastoral epistles, which are very consistent with what you would read in Corinthians, and elsewhere, where Paul's giving his statements, the way he interacts with people. I mean, all that's there. But yeah, true, there is a writing style. Plus, you're looking at different epochs of his life. If you look at, for me, Church is 0 compared to Reaching the Unreached, cha-ching, you're going to notice, I felt as an author, these were very different. My letters over the years, my journals over the years, my writing style has changed, and I learn new tricks as I go. But anyways, all that to say, they were devoting themselves to the apostles' teaching. And so some of those apostles wrote, but teaching was paramount. And it became, to Paul, very paramount after his first mission trip, when he realized, I can't just preach, lead them to Jesus, and then move on and expect that this faith community is not going to end up in heresy. So, of course, teaching becomes one of the key things when he leaves people behind, when he's picking elders, teach men who are also able to teach others, teach able men, as he says, who are in turn able to teach others. So there's like these 3 tiers of teaching. But anyways, all that to say, teaching was extremely important in the New Testament, but prayer is the activity that you see all throughout the book of Acts. Like it's just as common as breathing, really. Every time that I liken it to this, that the church's prayer life is the intake. It's like respiration. It's the intake of breath. And then their outreach is the exhale. And so there's this rhythm in Acts where it's inhale and exhale, prayer and outreach, prayer and outreach. And, some people don't like the term outreach now because you're trendy critters, you pastors and theologians, and you like to use buzzwords. And so now it's mission. But, okay, so prayer and mission. That's all.
Oh, okay. I thought we were pausing for dramatic effects so you could take a deep breath and.
I would mic drop, but it's on a coaxial cable arm. I mean, can't do that.
Fine. Yeah. So, what would you say? Like, how does prayer show up in your life? Like, you're getting ready to plant. So, how does that show up for someone who's getting ready to plant? Like, what's that like? I mean. I don't even know if that's a fair question because I don't even really know how to ask this. Is it just the thing that you do in the morning? Is it? I mean, what is it? What does it look like?
Yeah, are you asking me personally or in general?
Well, either or. I don't know how to ask.
So
I don't
so
know
for
what
me,
to ask.
for me, the mornings are good, and I think everybody struggles. There's a chemical in your brain that induces sleep. I'm trying to remember the name of it. But it comes in at night. I want to say it's melatonin, comes in at night, puts you to sleep. It drugs you. That's why you get drowsy. And then, caffeine inhibits those receptors. So your body has a cycle where it produces 2 chemicals, one that wakes you up, one that, produces melatonin. So, caffeine counteracts the melatonin, receptors. So, it just competes with that. And then it also has a stimulant in it. So that's why people, kind of take that. The part where you're drowsy in the afternoon is where the melatonin cycle starting, but that chemical that you have that wakes you up in the morning, that's worn off. So you don't get that stimulus effect. But, for some people, for that reason, they find it very hard to pray in the morning. Like, for example, Martin Lloyd-Jones, he couldn't pray in the morning. He had to pray in the afternoon, and he was honest about that. And he shared with people, the golden rule in this matter is to know thyself. If you read On Being a Pastor by Derek Prime and Alistair Begg, it's a really funny book. Derek Prime is one of those like I'm up at 4 a.m. kind of guys. Everything's structured. I have my routine. And Alistair Begg, all throughout the book, is I'm a wreck. I'm disorganized. I'm this. I'm flying by the seat of my pants. And so you see these 2 guys that are very different in how they approach. And I think everybody's different. I would just want to say that I agree with Lloyd-Jones that it should be the kind of thing where you have the freedom to really be who you are and to pray. Like Lloyd-Jones would argue, if you don't pray well in the morning, then don't pray in the morning, pray in the afternoon. Other people have to have a notebook. They have to write their thoughts to feel like they aren't going to wander, and then it crystallizes their thoughts and they're careful. Other people like to be free form. Other people, I mean, really, to be honest, if I look at my prayer life, mornings are good for me, and that's a start. I wish, in all honesty, I came back to prayer more in the day. And there's different parts of my ministry where I do. Like I've done all the things like set alarms at different times and stopped and prayed. Daniel prayed 5 times a day. He would face Jerusalem, and that's how they trapped him. one of the psalmists, or is it 3 times a day? I think it's a
No, I
psalmist
think it was
who's
5 because isn't that the reason why Muslims do it 5 times a day?
could be. And I know David in the Psalm says 5 times a day, I will look to you. And so,
let me actually expand on this one idea with a question for you. So let's say you do circle back later in the day. What exactly does that mean? Not as far as time of the day, but what does that mean for the prayer? Is it a 5-minute prayer? Is it an in-depth prayer? Is it a surface, hey guy, this is what I'm doing?
I think it depends.
Some guidance here?
I think it depends. Like aimless prayer is not helpful. So like when the disciples said, teach us to pray, Jesus gave them a structure. And I always find that interesting that he gave them the Lord's Prayer. And in the way that it's a skeleton, but they wanted to pray like him. And so the Lord's Prayer is really, I think, how Jesus prayed, where he kept the priorities of, our Father. There's that relationship. That's the first thing that comes in. Who art in heaven. Jesus said that was really important to know. You're on earth, he's in heaven. Don't try to fill up all this time. Like that was the point he makes. Keep your prayers brief. Like don't try to impress God. He's in heaven, you're on earth. Like he knows. You don't have to like write a book and tell me. He knows everything. And then he goes on to say, hallowed be your name, which is a truth. God's name is holy. It's amazing. You can meditate on that. It's also an injunction. It's a prayer request. Let your name be hallowed. Let your glory. That's like a prayer for God's name, which is his character, to be known and to be worshiped. And then he goes on to say, your kingdom come, which books and books of theology written on the kingdom that has come when Jesus was here, the kingdom that is coming to the church, and the kingdom that will come when heaven establishes itself on earth. So I won't go through all of it, but then give us our daily bread is dependence. Like Jesus had this kind of not formula, I've prayed through that and then I felt like, okay, I need to get away from that. But I prayed that for so many years of my Christianity, just using it like I would move on. It was almost like, I hate to use this analogy because I'm not a Catholic, but when they do the rosary and they're moving from bead to bead, like it's a ritual, it became a bit too ritualistic for me, but it ingrained into me that God's glory is chief, right? Like that's the number one thing that I submit to him and his purposes. And it's a surrender to selflessness and dependence upon him. So there are times where I need to pray more than others because I'm not there. And then there's, I would say that there's times in my day where if I were to pray today, I would have something very specific that I'd be praying to God. And I have been over the last few days going through a situation where I've had to just keep praying. And in some ways it's so I don't go nuts, it's so I don't go out of my head and start letting negative thoughts and fears and things like that take over. I have to keep going to God for strength. And I think you see that in David's prayer life. The Psalms are like a window into David's prayer life in the middle of just going through hellish situations of how he interacts with God. Mm-hmm. And there's this dependence and God, you're my rock, and I trust you, and this person's hurt me, and they're saying this about me, Lord. And, he's just, at every turn, he's going to God. And I think one of the helpful things about you bringing this up is that we don't often go before the Lord in these times and ask him. And I feel sometimes like we suffer needlessly when we don't. Like I'm comforted when I'm praying. So like that old song, how's it go? What a friend we have in Jesus, all our griefs and sins to bear. What a privilege to him to carry everything, or what a privilege it is to carry everything to him in prayer. And then it says, oh, what is it? Joy we often forfeit. I think that's how it goes, or is it peace or whatever? Because we're not going to him. And that's poignant. Like, that's very poignant to a Christian, you know. And I'll often find myself reacting like a practical atheist in situations, forgetting that God's here. Like I mentioned last week, like about my trials and my hardships. I'm preaching on spiritual warfare last Sunday. My car gets broken into twice, a bunch of other stuff in my life starts falling apart. And I'm like, okay, you know, one day I was great. I knew it was spiritual warfare. The next I didn't, and completely screwed it up. And then throughout the week, I've been more mindful. This is spiritual warfare.
Wow. Yeah.
And I've been taking a hammering, dude.
No, well, you know, that I think that just helps out so much. Because I mean, easily, like, one of the questions in this devotional, I don't know if it was today or yesterday or whatever, but it, you know, what stops you from praying? And as I look at my own life, I can easily say sin in my own life is what stops me from praying. Because one of the things that I've shared before in this podcast is that I have, like, I know when I've done something wrong. I usually know when I'm doing it, I'm sinning, right? Like, I just know. I grew up in the church. It's not like some big shock to me when I find out, oh, you mean you can't lie? You right? I mean, it's like, I know what I'm doing. And I would say for myself, that shame of going before God when you know you've been sinning, whether it's attitude, anything. I mean, take your pick of the poisons that are out there. It's the shame, and the shame for me is like, man, how can I approach God? And again, you know, in fact, I think in one of my prayers this morning with God, I was like, you know, Lord, I know I feel like I mock what Jesus did for me on the cross when I sin, because I know what I'm sinning, and there's shame in that, and that's what stops me from praying. And I also realize at the same time, Satan's happy with that. Sweet, stop you from praying.
Yeah,
great. Let that shame sink in. And I realized at the same time, and Jesus sitting there going, yeah, I already paid for that.
Right.
you know, I paid for that, bro. But it, you know, so for me, I can just, you know, say, and looking at all of that, that's one of those things that just, I don't know, it gets to me. And that's what I think stops me from praying more, is just shame. Absolutely. Just flat out shame.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's funny because when, you know, you look at, you know, the accusations of the enemy, that, you know, you got to think about it. Like, I like to reverse engineer, you know, there's that passage, this is actually the passage I preached on, and I'm almost like shuddering to share this because I know what a beating I've taken this week from sharing this, last Sunday, but, I guess I'm a glutton for punishment because I'm going to share it again. But in Ephesians 6, Paul says, put on the full armor of God that you may stand against the schemes of the enemy. And schemes are hidden. They're subversive. They're subterranean. If I say you're scheming, I'm saying that you do things secretly and not out in the open. And so when he's talking about Satan, he's a master tactician. He's a skilled manipulator, and that's what Paul's bringing up. And he says, put on the full armor of God that you could stand against the schemes. Like, you don't know what the attacks are that are coming, but if you had this armor on, it would help you. And what I love about the armor is there's 6 pieces, and then at the end he says, and above all, pray. Right? Above all, pray. So you know, we know that prayer is huge in this, but the armor pieces, if you reverse engineer, this is how I teach it, that you could tell what the schemes are primarily by looking at what the armor is. So if he says the antidote to the schemes is put on this armor that you could stand against the schemes, then ergo, it follows that this armor is going to tell me what he's doing. So for example, the breastplate of righteousness. If I knew that I'm 100% righteous in Christ, that one bounces off me like a bullet off Superman's chest, right? Like, can't touch this, I'm bulletproof. You can't hurt me with that stuff, because whatever you say, even if it's true, I've been given the righteousness of Christ. Then the next one is the belt of truth, which truth is juxtaposed between our feelings and our thoughts. Our thoughts and feelings aren't always true. And so having God's truth, what he really says about me, not what I think he feels, but what he says in his word about me, right? Were I to number the thoughts of love you have about me, God, they would outnumber the sands on the seashore, the grains of sand on the seashore. That's truth. That's not how you feel all the time, but that's truth concerning you, coming from God, the Father's heart. And then, you've got the feet shod with the readiness, which means you don't slip around on the battlefield, because it's a very slick place. Human beings are mostly fluid. So when you open one up, the battlefield becomes very wet and muddy, and you slip around. And of course, if you go down and fall on the ground, all someone has to do is put a sword in you, you're done. So the readiness is that ability to stand. You're not going to slide around. And he says that's the readiness or the firm-footedness that comes from the gospel of peace. So had in my trial last week, I've been mindful that, hey, God's got this. And even now, even in my trial this week, I've got to have peace and allow God to minister his peace to me. I may not like the way things turn out, but I've got to remember God loves me. He's on my side. He's got me in the palm of his hands. And dang it, that'll give me peace, that the sovereign God of the universe is for me. And so those three things are yours. And what I always like to say about the schemes of the devil is that his schemes are twofold. Number one, to keep you from using what you already have. He doesn't want you to use those three pieces. They're on you. They're strapped to you. All three of those pieces are strapped to you, right? The other three pieces, he says, take up. So take up, put on the helmet, take up the shield, take up the sword. These are things that when a soldier gets off, I know from being a firefighter, first thing I do is take my firefighting helmet off and let my head breathe. So it's the first thing a soldier would do is take his helmet off when he's not in battle. So he could, breathe and not overheat in that helmet. So he says, put that on. That's the helmet of the hope of salvation. And the hope of salvation is that idea that when you're getting the snot beat out of you, I'm going to make it. I'm going to win, right? I'm taking a beating right now, but I'm here. I'm not dead. I'm not knocked out. That may have hurt. I may be seeing stars. I took a blow there, but I'm going to make it. And, then the shield of faith is to advance, right? Because fear is the opposite of faith. So the darts are fears. I don't think they're temptations. And that's what you use a shield for. The Romans would use it to advance against arrows. So they'd make that tortoiseshell formation. So that's faith. That's, hey, I'm gonna, these are my offensive weapons now. I'm pressing in, I'm going on the offense now. And then lastly, the sword of the Spirit. And then he goes above all pray. So, like you said about that guilt, that's half the battle. It's kind of like G.I. Joe. Now I know knowing's half the battle. And just, one of the things, because I read a bunch of Puritans and Reform guys, and thing that they're really good at is telling you it's the gospel and it's not about you. It's about him. Kind of like when Moses, I love this. Moses, when he goes before God, he says, God, look, if you ditch these people, it makes you look bad, right? Like that you delivered them out of Egypt and now you're going to leave them in this desert. Like you're just going to abandon, because God says, go on into the promised land. So God changes tack and he goes, okay, look, I'll be with you for 40 years, but they're not entering, right? Like I'll be with them. I'm not going to abandon my people, but I am going to discipline him. So it's not that the Lord doesn't discipline us. It's not that, it's always in love. He always does it for our good. And of course, these are pictures for us, but God decides, because Moses says, you can't abandon them, God. That's going to say something bad about you. And what I love is the Bible tells us that conversation, because Jesus says, I'll never leave you or forsake you. And he never will. Like, you may be disciplined at times and you may be walking around in the wilderness, but God is still going to always be with you. Like, no matter what, he's your God and he's going to be there for you. So, that's kind of the cool bit is, I love how, really when I come before the throne of God, it's him. It's his character that matters. That he is this God that loves me. And of course, they didn't know the gospel back then. Specifically, I just got done doing Joshua, and God specifically made it so that Moses could not deliver them in, because he didn't want people to think you can get into the promised land by your works or by the law or by observing the commands. But he has Joshua, which is Jesus' name. He has Joshua do it, and everything's done for them. The fields are planted. God fights the first battle, Jericho. He just goes, look, everything's done for you. So kind of cool. Big detour. Sorry.
No, it was a great detour. In fact, all I can say to that is,
I used to have more friends before I got into church planting.
Well, we can never hear the gospel enough. I'm prepping for this textbook, and I'm reading Center Church by Tim Keller. And I love, because he keeps quoting Lloyd Jones, and I've always known like Tim Keller's a big Lloyd Jones fan, because he is Lloyd Jones in the 21st century. Like that's who he is, I found Tim Keller, I don't know, somewhere in the 21st century, not the 20th. So in the 2000s somewhere. And I remember I was just like, because I'd read everything Lloyd Jones, and I'm like, that's Lloyd Jones. And that's what Tim Keller is. But he keeps mentioning how that Lloyd Jones always, and this is part of Welsh tradition, was to have a Sunday morning teaching service for believers and a Sunday evening evangelistic church service for non-believers you bring your friends to. And that was just, and even if no non-believers came, Lloyd Jones would always say every believer needs to hear the gospel every week. So he would preach the gospel Sunday night, and all believers would turn up, and sometimes they'd bring their friends, but Lloyd Jones would constantly hammer on every believer needs to hear the gospel continuously.
I can't tell you how much I love that concept.
Yeah.
I really love that concept.
Yeah. Because you don't forget, you even like communion, right? Like that whole idea that Jesus goes, as often as you come together, do this. This is my body given for you. This is my blood shed for you. Every time. Like, that's rad. That's Jesus saying, I want you to remember this. Always I did this for you. Don't ever let this leave your sight.
Yeah.
Right? So, but I guess that brings us kind of to that was a great topic, Pete. I'm sorry I kind of hijacked it at the end. But
I got so much value out of that, because I think I just kind of started that topic in my head this morning, but had no idea where it needed to go. And I really felt like where our conversation went is where it needed to go. So I'm very grateful. Very grateful.
Right.
But, while we're doing all these prayers, while we're praying all the time, what if we don't have time to do our bookkeeping and our IRS compliance? How do we mix the two?
Well, Pete, you go to simplifychurch.com. Simplifychurch.com, where they will simplify. They will take all that stuff off your shoulders so you can be preaching those morning for teaching messages and evening for gospel messages. You be sorted. After all, if you think one sermon is hard on a Sunday, try doing two on a Sunday. That was a world I lived in for a number of years. But, but I was going to say, go to simplifychurch.com and they will simplify, and tell them that Peyton and Pete sent you. They'll give you special treatment.
Dude, I'm telling you, our transitions do not ever get any better. It's like,
they're awesome. They're so good. I love them. I was talking to Josh Henry about him not long ago, and a couple of weeks ago, and I told him, no, we think that's one of the highlight of our shows. That's what we think. I don't think our listeners think that, but we think it's so funny when we transition into that last ad.
Oh my gosh, I definitely do.
Remember, we used to have sponsors at the beginning. We'd just bust up laughing trying to do their commercial.
Oh, yeah.
That's not good either.
Yeah, no. But you know what? If you sponsor this podcast and you haven't listened to it, it's not our fault, because we've got 300 plus episodes that you go back and listen to how we treat sponsors. So I say it's all on you. It's all on your shoulders when you get us.
All right. Well, guys, thanks for joining Peyton and Pete on the Church Planter Podcast. This has been, well, Peyton and Pete reminding you, if you want to go, what's wrong with me? If you want to reach the ones no one's reaching, you need to go where nobody's going and do what nobody's doing. Dang it. There you go.
Hey, and this soundbite, it's really just for you.
I love you, man.
Thanks for joining us for another weekly episode of the Church Planter Podcast with Pete Mitchell and Peyton Jones. We'd love to hear your comments on this episode of the Church Planter Podcast. Visit us online and let us know what you thought at churchplanterpodcast.com. If you subscribe to us via iTunes and have enjoyed the podcast, leave us a positive review. The more positive reviews we receive in iTunes, the more iTunes will promote us to other church planners who would benefit from this show. This podcast is brought to you by the Church Planter Magazine, which is available in the iTunes newsstand or online via churchplantermagazine.com.